the challenge I find is that I really feel with what you're saying with the book, there's a difference between what you're saying and then the other extreme, which is mollycoddling. So there's neglect and then there's mollycoddling. And I find that as humans, our brains are wired for extremes. So if we've seen that being mistreated or neglected is really bad for us, we go the opposite way and we go, okay, now I'm going to make sure that this kid has like 24 cushions around it.
I'd be curious to know. I like to answer that question because it's a very important one. Yeah. But I just want to know exactly what you mean by mollycoddling.
What I see, and I'm talking about people that I know and people that will speak to me, is that anyone who had a tough childhood are then trying to create a scenario for their child where that child experiences no pain.
They no longer respond to the child needs. They're coming from their own anxieties.
Yes.
So mollycoddling has got nothing to do with the child. It has to do with the anxieties of the parents. That kid is going to download the anxieties of the parents. So mollycoddle kids become very anxious and very scared and very ungrounded in themselves. On the other hand, it's not possible to love kids too much. In fact, there's a very interesting study where they looked at a large number of mothers and their infants in the early few months. And most mothers in this study were seen as really good mothers, and some were a bit distant and because of their own traumas, not as available. And a small group were seen as like super loving in how they doted over their infants. Okay? 30 years later, they looked at these infants now as adults. The ones that were most emotionally grounded and healthy were the ones who had received the super loving. So there's a difference between, you can't love a child too much. So the mollycoddling that you describe is not a child being loved too much. It's a child who has to endure the anxieties of the parents. And there's a very famous example in world history of someone whose parents wanted to protect him from suffering was the Buddha. He never saw death, he never saw illness, he never saw old age until he goes out and sees a dying person, sees a very poor person, a very ill person, a very old person. He realizes there's suffering in the world. So all the mollycoddling he received could not ultimately protect him from the awareness of pain and vulnerability. Although, if I talk about the Buddha, I also have to say that his own trauma is often not talked about because his mother died when he was a week old, or right after birth, didn't she? So even they tried to protect him, they couldn't. But so anyway, mollycoddling has got nothing to do with the needs of the child.
Yeah, that's a great differentiator.
It has to do with the unmet needs of the parents. And as soon as parents project their needs onto the child, they no longer see the child as they exist. They see their own anxieties, their fears, and their own fantasies. Naturally, that's going to hurt the child.
Yeah, that's such a great differentiator. Again, it's a trauma response.
It's a trauma response.
Yeah, it's a trauma response. How and when should children, young adults be exposed to pain in order to develop their vulnerability? Like, as you said, the capacity to experience a wound. Like, how and when do we allow ourselves? What environment is required to allow ourselves to experience pain in a healthy way? Or is it just going to come anyway?
It's the nature of life. There's no reason to deliberately expose children to pain because they're going to experience it. The question is, how do we support them when they do? You know why? Because their puppy's going to die. Because grandfather's going to die. Because some neighborhood friend won't want to play with them. Because they're not going to get the toy they wanted. Because some disappointment will happen. So pain is inevitable. But it doesn't have to become traumatic if the child is supported in experiencing the pain and moving past it. So we don't have to impose or bring pain into kids' life to train them. Life's going to do that. The question is, how are we to interact with them while they're enduring the pain?